Hey everyone, I'm Amanda, and in today's video, I'm going to share with you my IVF journey. I will go over the cost of IVF, the medication we use, and the IVF process and our overall results with egg retrieval. This will be a two-part series because at this point, we've only done our egg retrieval. And so look out for part 2 where we will share the next part, which is the embryo transfer and then hopefully our pregnancy. So with that, let's get started. My husband and I started our fertility journey in 2021. I had my IUD removed and we were ready to start having kids. But as you can probably guess, based on the title of this video, it didn't go as planned. I discovered I had PCOS, which stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome, and we also learned that my husband had a low sperm count. We knew that if we wanted to become parents, we needed to access medical intervention, and so that's where the IVF journey began. On a side note, my husband and I are from Ontario, Canada, and so our situation made us eligible to access the government-funded IVF cycle. So right away, we knew we wanted to get on the wait list because wait lists can go from anywhere from 3 months at some places up until like 2, and I've even seen 3 or 4 years. So the first step for us was to find a fertility clinic that we really liked. We decided to go with a fertility clinic recommended to me by my naturopath, and after meeting our new fertility doctor, we got on the wait list. Like I said, these wait lists can be really long, and so if you're looking for a clinic, there's this really amazing resource you can access. I'll put a QR code somewhere on the screen and also a link in the description. Also, if you are in Ontario working with a clinic you really love, let me know in the comments so that other people can check them out too. So continuing on with our journey, our clinic told us that we were going to wait about a year, and they were pretty spot on with their estimation, thankfully. We got on the list on April 2023 and got our call June 2024. But in the meantime, my husband and I wanted to do everything in our power to optimize our fertility, and so I actually lost 50 pounds and created a video on what that looked like. So be sure to check that out if that's something of interest to you. My husband also did a ton to help improve his sperm quality and quantity. And so if you're interested in seeing what he did, be sure to check out that video too. It's not posted yet, but hopefully by the time you see this video, it is. All of the links will be in the description box below. Beyond optimizing your health, there was a ton of tests that we also needed to complete before getting started. These tests were all pretty easy and mostly covered by OHIP, which is Ontario's health insurance plan. And the only tests that we weren't covered for included the AMH test, the Y microdeletion test, and the semen analysis and DNA integrity assay. Hopefully I'm saying that right. We also completed a monitoring cycle, which I believe was part of the funded cycle protocol, but I'm not 100% certain on that, and so best to check with your specific fertility clinic. Along with a mountain of tests, I also had to have a very minor surgery, which was super easy. I believe it's called the polypectomy. Anyways, the name is on the screen here, and it was super easy. Essentially, what they needed to do was remove a couple of polyps from my uterus, and so this was maybe like a half-hour surgery, and so I felt like I literally blinked and the surgery was done, which is the case for most surgeries. But essentially, the reason why I needed to do that test was because there was a chance that an embryo could attach to one of the polyps, which would then lead to a miscarriage, and so they wanted to just eliminate any possibility of that. So after all of the tests, the surgeries, the monitoring cycle, we were finally ready to get started. Shortly after receiving our call in June, we signed a consent form, connected with the financial department, and set up some weekly acupuncture to help reduce stress and increase blood flow. We also met with our IVF nurse, who asked me to call on day 1 of my next period in July so that we can conduct some baseline testing. So that was essentially blood work and ultrasound. Honestly, when they tell you that going through IVF feels like a part-time job, it's so true, because I felt like I was constantly running from one appointment to another. I wasn't seeing friends, and I felt like there was so much new things I needed to remember. Like, the learning curve is really high for going through something like this. And so if you are going through this, I really feel for you. And if you have friends going through it, definitely check in on them to make sure they're doing okay. But moving on, we had our baseline testing in July, and I did my blood work and ultrasound on day 3 of that cycle. And after that appointment, I met with my IVF nurse. Meeting with my IVF nurse was so helpful because she answered all of the questions that I had. And just as a quick tip for anybody going into a meeting with anybody around IVF, I found that using ChatGPT to ask it to create a list of questions I should ask for the appointment to be very helpful, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? And so definitely leverage AI throughout this process. But always double check the sources, because sometimes, AI can create things out of the blue. And so although it can be a good resource, don't like completely rely on it for all of the information. But yep, so I met with the IVF nurse. She answered all our questions, and she walked us through the IVF calendar that our clinic provides, which I think is so helpful because it essentially gives you an idea of how many times you're going to be going into the clinic during your egg retrieval time period. And it also outlines all of the medication and what doses you're administering on each day. And so going into the next month, I knew what to expect, which was really helpful in managing my stress levels and anxiety about it all. Oh, and I forgot to mention, before going into the egg retrieval time period, we had to decide whether or not we wanted to do genetic testing. And so we were told that going through with genetic testing would increase the likelihood of pregnancy and also decrease the likelihood of miscarriage. And so although it was an expensive add-on to all of the costs, we thought it would be really worth it for us. So once we were past the meeting with our IVF nurse, we were finally ready to start the egg retrieval process. So once August hit, I called on the first day of my period and was scheduled to show up to the clinic on day 3. During day 3, they did the baseline testing and blood work, and I purchased my first set of medication, which included my protocol, which is Recovel, Menopur, and Letrozole. So all of that information is on the screen. That is the cost of each of the meds. I will show a full breakdown of all of the costs at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. So during that visit, I purchased only enough for 4 days because the plan was for me to come back to the clinic to see how my body was responding to the meds. This way, my fertility team could adjust my protocol if needed. So my husband and I stumbled through the needles at home, following tutorials, and because Menopur, you actually have to mix it yourself depending on your dosage. I was really overwhelmed by that specifically. And so I had Rob do that all on his own, which was really great because I was okay with actually administering the needles myself. But for some reason, the mixing part really stressed me out. And so thankfully, my husband just took care of all that for me. So fast forward, we're on day 7 now. I was asked to come into the clinic. And after doing my ultrasound and blood work, I was asked to wait in the waiting room for a phone call. And so that's what I did. The reason why they had to call me was because they were going to tell me how my body was reacting to the medication so far. And they were also going to tell me what they had observed in the ultrasound. So just taking a look at how many follicles were developing, what the size was, and whether or not to see if I needed to adjust my medication or not. On the side note, this was something I really appreciated about my clinic, was that everything I needed was there. So if I needed blood work, I can go there. Ultrasound, right there. All of the fertility meds, which aren't found at all pharmacies, was there as well. And so I think having all of that very accessible made it super easy and saved me a lot of time. Anyways, my IVF nurse called and shared with me that I had 3 follicles growing on the left ovary and 7 follicles growing on the right ovary. And everything was measuring anywhere between 10 and 11. And so she assured me that this was good news because it meant that they would all continue growing around the same rate. So based on everything that they were seeing in the ultrasound, the plan was to continue my protocol and introduce a new needle that would prevent premature ovulation. So I bought enough medication for the next 3 days because again, I was gonna come back. And during my next visit, I did my blood work, ultrasound, and then during this appointment, they had told me that I had 14 follicles growing on one side and then 16 on the other. And everything was measuring anywhere between 10 and 16. And so they told me that this was good news. And I was pretty happy, throughout this entire process. Sometimes they tell you things and you don't know whether or not it's good news or not, but thankfully they reassured me that everything was going really well so far. So I purchased more medication this time, enough for just 2 days, and returned on day 12 and did my blood work, ultrasound, the drill, and waited in the waiting room for my phone call. And during this phone call, they told me that I had 19 on one ovary and then 15 on the other ovary. And so this was a much bigger number, and so that felt good. So during this process, I also forgot to mention, they told me that I was at risk of OHSS, which stands for Ovarian Hyperstimulation Syndrome. And essentially that means that my body has an exaggerated reaction to fertility meds. And so because of this, I'm at risk of having very swollen ovaries that have a liquid that could potentially leak into my chest or abdomen. And so my care team was really good at monitoring me for symptoms and just making sure that I felt comfortable and cared for throughout the entire process. So that made me feel really happy with having chosen this clinic. So because of the risk of OHSS, I had to avoid things like yoga, intense exercises. And so during this time, I really just focused on making sure I got my steps. But anyways, the clinic asked me to return the next day. And so now we're on day 13 and I was there again for more tests. So blood work and ultrasound. And at this point, ultrasounds were much longer because It took a lot more time to count and see all of the follicles. And it was a lot more uncomfortable because my ovaries were so big at this point, right? And so that was something interesting I didn't expect during this process, was how quick it would be at the beginning and how much longer and uncomfortable it would be near the end. But, you know, it makes sense when you think about it. But moving on, I was cleared to stop my medication and start taking a new medication to prepare me for egg retrieval. And I also purchased my trigger shot. And so things were really moving quickly. I was getting really excited, but also kind of nervous and scared for the next part of the process. So on day 14, I started the new meds, and then on day 15, continued them, which was now the day of my egg retrieval. So if you're watching this because you are going to be doing an egg retrieval soon, feel free to skip the next part because I didn't have the best experience pain-wise. And so if you want to go into your surgery blind, go for it. That's what I did, and I think it helped me not have any stress beforehand. And so what I will say too is that not everyone has the same experience that I did. There are some people who go into the surgery and, you know, share that they didn't experience any pain. And so there's always a chance you could be one of those lucky ones. I was not, but, you know, given the outcome, I would have done that surgery over and over again to have the same outcome. And so feel free to skip the next part. I have chapters down below, so you can just go ahead and go to the description and then skip it. But if you haven't skipped, then let's get into it. So what I should say is that in Ontario, they don't actually put you to sleep for this surgery. Instead, you're under conscious sedation. And so some people can't feel pain during this, but I could feel everything. And although I don't remember all the details, there are parts of the surgery that I do remember. And if there's one thing I do remember, is the pain. So anyways, I don't think I can be more clear in that. But everything I'm going to share with you about our surgery is really based on what I've been told about the surgery and also the description of it from my husband. But anyways, they started the surgery, and right away they discovered that I had ovulated early. And so they told my husband that because I ovulated early, there was a chance that they were not going to be able to retrieve as many eggs as they expected. And so Rob had to make a big decision without my support, because when you are under so much drugs, you are not legally allowed to make decisions like this. And so all of my trust was in Rob. And so for me, it was no big deal because, you know, Rob and I are always on the same page. And so what he did was he asked, you know, based on what you can see, how many eggs do you think you can retrieve? And they told him around 17, which I mentioned earlier. I had 19 and 19 on both ovaries. And if I didn't mention that, my bad. But I had 19 and 19 originally. And so going in, they said they can maybe get 20. So almost half. But based on that number alone, Rob decided to go forward with the surgery. And thank God he did, because we got really great results. But the reason why he had to make that decision in that moment was because it was part of our funded cycle, meaning that we had the option to cancel that surgery and then go through the medication and everything all over again, like the next month. This would have been free for us to have the surgery moved, but we would have had to pay for all of the meds all over again. And so that would have been another $7,000 maybe, right? And so he made the decision to go with the surgery. And so they continued on and did their best to locate as many as possible. Like I said, I don't remember a lot of the surgery, but what I do remember was how amazing the team was. I had a nurse right in my ear basically telling me that I was doing an amazing job and that it would be over soon, and that just all of these really nice and reassuring and warm things. And my husband was there for support, but she was just right in my ear. And so I remember her a lot more. Now I've told Rob that for, you know, future surgeries, I want you in my ear, because it's hard to know that you're in the room because I guess of the drugs, right? But anyways, big shout out to my care team for being there and taking care of me during one of the most painful experiences of my life. Yeah, even the ultrasound tech, who I had recognized from previous appointments, was so amazing. And even just to be able to recognize somebody on the team, I think really helped alleviate my stress as well. And so although it was a very painful experience, there was a lot of good in that experience, in that I had an amazing nurse that in my ear. I had that ultrasound person who I recognized and was so friendly. And my doctor was also so amazing in explaining what to expect during the surgery and so on. And so everything but the pain was good. So on a side note, if you are going to do this surgery and it's part of your funded cycle, maybe this is a conversation you have with your partner about, if you had ovulated early, and I ask them how many eggs you have, and they tell me what number do I cancel it at and what number do I continue it at, right? So something I wish I had known before going in, for example. But yeah, all things said, I'm happy with how it turned out. So the surgery ended. I was now in recovery mode. I had a ton of Gatorade at home because they tell you to have a lot of electrolytes. And so I took everything very seriously in terms of the recommendations. And they also said that I need to start walking right away because of the risk of OHSS. And so even on the day of the surgery, even though I was in a lot of discomfort, I still managed to get a 10-minute walk in, which was really nice. Also the benefits of, having the surgery in the summer. But yeah, I took care of myself. I was in recovery mode. And on the day of, they called us to let us know, you got, I think they said 20 eggs retrieved. And so that was an amazing number for us. And then of the 20 that were retrieved, we had 17 that were mature. And then of the 17, we had 15 that were successfully fertilized. And we were told that we were going to get another call. I believe it was like 2 days later. And so starts the waiting game, right? Like this whole process and this whole experience, the fertility journey, is a lot of waiting. And it's hard because you want to distract yourself, but at the same time, it's the only thing you can think about. And so we had to wait, I think, another 2 days to get a call and an update on how our embryos were doing. And so after 2 days, they called us, and of the 15 eggs that were fertilized, we had 12 embryos. And so this was amazing. We did not expect such a high number. And so we were really thankful. But we knew that we still had a ways to go and that we were still going to receive more updates. And so although we were happy, we were trying to manage our expectations as much as possible. And so another 2 days goes on, and they called us again, and they told us we actually had 13 embryos, which was wild because we never thought the number could go up. But they told us that they had another embryo that they were still monitoring. So it was kind of like a late bloomer. And so now we were at 13 embryos. So again, we wait. And we finally got our last call before receiving genetic testing results, and they told us that we had 10 embryos. This was like a dream come true outcome for us, especially given that I had ovulated early and everything, right? And so we were over the moon, so happy, celebrating, doing everything we could to just celebrate the good news. We called all our friends and family that were, in our inner circle following along as well. And so yeah, after all of the tests, the surgery, the visits, we finally got an amazing outcome. So 4 weeks later, we finally heard from genetic testing. We met with our doctor, and she told us that all 10 embryos were actually transferable. And so again, more amazing news. Of the 10, we had 6 that were euploid, which is like the best quality kind. And we had 2 mosaic and 2 unknown. So they weren't able to get a result out of those 2 embryos. But because it wasn't like the bad kind, like aneuploid, or the non-transferable kind, I should say, instead of bad, all 10 were transferable. And so that's where we're at now. If you're interested in seeing how our transfer goes, look out for part 2 of this video series, because I will be sharing the transfer, all the medication, and that entire experience in a nutshell, hopefully ending in a pregnancy. But, we'll wait and see. We've been really lucky up until this point, and we're just so grateful that this has all happened for us. Because yeah, nothing's ever guaranteed in this journey, as many of you might know. But with that said, this concludes the first part of our IVF journey. I hope this video was valuable to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, or feel free to message us on TikTok or Instagram, and where else? On here. Yeah, we are a couples health journey. And so thank you for watching. And if you're on this journey too, best of luck and all of the baby dust to you. All right, hope to see you around. Take care.